Hello, everyone. I'm Alec Rovensky. I am a Residency Director at the Institute for Public Architecture. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the organizers for putting together an amazing series of events that is really interdisciplinary. It's been a privilege to be a part of this, both in person and now virtually. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Terra Dispositions, which is an investigation that began as a thesis project for my undergraduate degree at Syracuse University, and has sort of, I've revisited a couple times since then, most recently during a residency briefly at the Urban Soils Institute this past summer, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Yeah, so let's get started. So this project aims to expose the ecological transformations of territories laced with human agency by examining the residues left by water using clay as a registration of hydrological phenomena and a mix of ancient and current digital fabrication technologies. So humanity's interventions of the landscape have largely centered around controlling and manipulating water. Urbanism is increasingly favoring dryness by paving over wetlands, damming, building over river flows, and fostering coastal expansion. In turn, these interventions are disrupting underlying hydrology and local ecosystems. Because many of these initial transformations occur beneath the ground and over long stretches of time, there remains a general unawareness of the immediate ecological consequences of these interventions. Therefore, the project attempts to procure awareness of these changes by examining the roles of placemaking, enacting agency through exhibition, and temporal monument. Placemaking. So watering holes have long been places of social and political significance. Step wells, most common in Western India but found throughout the subcontinent, were developed to cope with seasonal fluctuations in water availability. Serving as utilitarian structures, but also as sites of religious ceremonies and social gatherings, their multifaceted societal functions led to the construction of significant ornamental and architectural features, visualized here in a 3D scanning of the well produced by a digital design studio at the Glasgow School of Art. So serving as a contemporary example of a watering hole, Tainan Spring in Tainan City, Taiwan, is a shopping mall turned urban lagoon that recycled the subterranean parking garage into a sunken plaza that engages the urban center with the city's waterfront. Agency through exhibition. So this project rejects the nature versus man-made dichotomy, as they have become one and the same. No square foot of nature has been left untouched. David Gisson recognizes nature as a political and social production, a site of conjunction and over-eroding, which has been overwhelmingly laced with human agency. He raises archives and museums as sites bursting with complex political ecologies that maintain strict environmental guidelines to acquire and maintain artifacts. Olafur Eliasson's exhibit, Your Waste of Time, for example, held chunks of an Icelandic glacier inside a refrigerated room in a museum in Berlin. The project considers the role of time and its relativity, from the vastness of geologic time to the nanosecond of the glacier's existence in a gallery space. For Riverbed, he brought in Icelandic hydrology into the Louisiana Museum in Denmark, questioning the meaning and experience of the museum itself, as well as the complexities of the relationship between the artists, the building, and the viewer. Clay as residue. Material behaviors such as these can begin to reveal ecological phenomena through their chemical and physical changes. This project utilizes clay, a residue historically significant for its elasticity and widespread availability. Here, clay becomes a registrant of hydrological transformations. Through the integration of traditional slip casting and contemporary digital fabrication methods, the project attempts to reveal these changes through the form-making of a temporal ecological monument. Clay, long considered a nuisance and unreliable building material for its instability and dynamic properties that change at different stages of its use, can actually serve as an effective tool to index the various phenomena that act upon it. So for this project, I'm using an industrialized ceramics process called slip casting, which uses plaster molds to mass produce hollow ceramic objects. The project builds upon traditional craft by integrating digital fabrication processes, including the CNC mill, photogrammetry, and LiDAR. So this is a representation of that process, and I'm going to get into breaking down each step. First, the object is digitally modeled into a mold using 3D modeling software, in this case Rhino. Next, it's transcribed by the CNC into foam according to the digital model. It's extracted and assembled. The resulting foam mold is lubricated, plaster is mixed, and poured inside. Once the plaster sets, it is removed from the foam mold and prepared for the production of a master mold, which is a positive of the negative of the original mold. The master is made from a flexible silicone rubber 2-part mixture. The master mold is removed from the plaster mold and prepared for the mass production phase. Plaster is poured onto the master mold, creating a new plaster mold. This process produces a new set of plaster molds in less than an hour and can be repeated over and over. Then the slip casting process begins with a thin application of colored veneer slip onto the plaster mold, which is then assembled, buckled, and poured to capacity. After about an hour, excess slip is drained from the mold, leaving a thin layer of slip on the interior plaster surfaces. As the plaster absorbs the slip's moisture, the slip dries and solidifies into a shell of the form. The final object is removed from the mold. The finished object can then be converted back into a digital object through photogrammetry or LiDAR scanning, which captures physical measurements, textures, and voids. This results in a cyclical production loop, with the option to plug the produced object back into the process to repeat the cycle with a new scanned object. This can allow for the rapid scaling up or down of the object in each loop of the process. Instead of attempting to control the material, this process is responsive to the material behaviors of clay, even as each step presents challenges to production, with a few examples here. As the object moves through the production cycle, it is inherently altered at each step by mishaps, inconsistencies, and errors. The resulting object therefore becomes an index of each of the processes that were involved in its inception. By observing and responding to this data, an iterative process resulted in the object's final form, in order to maximize mold compatibility and strength while minimizing weight, cracking, and breakage. That's where the shape comes from. Deployment. The project proposes 2 phases for the objects, as a collective assemblage and as an individual indexical artifact. For the first phase, the unfired objects in their most brittle state are articulated into a vertical surface and deployed into the earth. They are partially dug into the soil, using the underlying earth as well as each other for structural support. Their forms allow for a degree of flexibility during deployment, as they can be shifted to accommodate for differing slopes on the deployment site. At this stage, the ceramic blocks are at their most absorbent, rapidly registering hydrological phenomena, deteriorating where they come into contact with water, and marking flood lines with changes in color. Different phenomena affect the object's decay differently, including factors such as temperature, intensity, and humidity. In this example on the top left, that block is completely submerged in water, whereas on the top right, it's sort of receiving a constant flow of water from a tap. And then the bottom right, of course, is under a rainstorm. These assemblies can be arranged into a well formation that serves as an indexical cross-section into a site's hydrology, serving both as a literal indicator of flooding, humidity, or rain, and as a visual representation of otherwise hidden phenomena. These objects can be left to completely decay back into the earth or be extracted and fired in a kiln. Firing the deployed object seals the recorded hydrological phenomena, as the block will no longer react to water. In this phase, the blocks become artifactual objects, indexes of the various phenomena that acted upon them, similar to the cycle of their production. They are articulated and displayed as they would appear in the soil, but in a static state, reminiscent of a filing cabinet containing data. Through 3D scanning, these objects can be digitally archived or physically exhibited and distributed or sold. In any case, they become artifactual pieces of evidence for intervention in the landscape. This summer, I spent a sunny weekend afternoon asking members of the public how they felt about clay and water over a hand-building workshop I set up on the Swale House porch. Participants were given a ball of air-dry clay and a simple prompt to create any clay object. We had about 100 participants representing all ages from New York City and from abroad. Most adults reported that the last time they had touched clay was sometime in high school. Many found that the material is a good tool for representing their ideas, as it was easy to use regardless of their experience with it. Many participants asked questions about the material and its properties, and many were surprised to learn that wild clay was so commonly occurring and available throughout the landscape. Through this type of collective workshopping, I was able to connect visitors through a unified medium. Participants produced structures, living things, vessels, blobs, and abstract forms that can be described as a sort of hybrid of what people had on their minds that day and what the person sitting next to them was producing. To conclude, in Amphibious Territories, Ela Berman writes about the complexities and boundlessness of the liquid landscape, which has yet to be explored. This project posits that there is a need for a more porous and engaged narrative with groundwater. By working in unison with wet material behavior instead of against it, we can begin investigating productive actions to dismantle the regime of a dry ideology and procure greater awareness of the precarious ecological state in which we find ourselves. Thank you.